What if that small ache or nagging fatigue is actually the first sign of something life changing? From Venus Williams battling years of unexplained pain to Dwyane Wade's kidney cancer diagnosis, today we're exploring why people, especially athletes and men, delay seeking care and how dangerous it can be. Welcome to What the Health Confessions of a Black Nurse, the show where we tackle the real stories and challenges that shape our health, resilience, and advocacy. I'm Delilah, the healthcare navigator, and today's conversation is one that hits close to home for so many people. We're talking about why we delay care, why we ignore or push past symptoms even when our bodies are telling us something's wrong. From fear and mistrust to financial stress and cultural pressures, these delays can have devastating consequences. And we've seen this play out with some of the biggest names in sports. Venus Williams spent years searching for answers before finally being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. Serena Williams nearly lost her life after childbirth when her concerns weren't taken seriously. Chris Bosh's career ended early because of recurring blood clots. Muhammad Ali and Brett Favre faced neurological conditions after years of ignoring warning signs. And even Dwyane Wade, yes, one of the greatest to ever play the game, was diagnosed with kidney cancer after initially downplaying his symptoms. But this isn't just about athletes, it's about everyday people. This episode blends personal stories, athlete examples, and practical strategies to push past hesitation. Let's get into it. So before we get into the systems, the stats, and the solutions, I want to slow this down and talk about something very human. Because delaying care doesn't usually start with denial. It starts with rationalization. We tell ourselves, it's probably nothing. I'll deal with it after this season. I'm too busy right now. I don't want to know. And what makes this conversation powerful is that we've seen this play out at the highest levels with elite athletes who had access to the best trainers, doctors, and resources in the world and still delayed care. Let's start with Venus Williams. For years, Venus experienced joint pain, overwhelming fatigue, and trouble maintaining stamina, symptoms that most people would brush off as overtraining or stress. In fact, one doctor even told her it was exercise induced asthma. But something still didn't add up. It took 7 years, seven, before Venus was finally diagnosed with Sjogren's syndrome, an autoimmune disease that can cause chronic pain, fatigue, and even organ damage if untreated. She didn't delay care because she didn't care about her body. She delayed because the symptoms were vague, because the answers weren't clear, and because she was conditioned to push through. And that's the part I want to sit with for a second, because this idea of pushing through, of ignoring pain, fatigue, or discomfort is deeply ingrained, especially in athletes and especially in men. I want all my health enthusiasts out there to ask yourself, when you hear Venus's story, what stands out to you about how easy it is to normalize symptoms? Honestly, what stands out to me the most is how reasonable it all sounds in the moment. When Venus talks about joint pain, fatigue, and low stamina, those are symptoms a lot of us hear every day, especially if you're active, working hard, or under stress. You tell yourself, I'm just tired, or I need more sleep, or this comes with the grind. And as athletes, or even just as men, we're taught to normalize discomfort. Pain is part of the process. Fatigue means you're working hard. So instead of seeing symptoms as warning signs, we see them as proof that we're pushing ourselves. What really hits me is that Venus didn't ignore her body because she was careless. She ignored it because the symptoms didn't feel serious enough and because she was conditioned to push through. That's dangerous because when symptoms come on slowly, they become your new normal. And once something becomes normal, you stop questioning it. I think a lot of people listening can relate to that, especially men, because we don't wait for something to feel off. We wait for it to feel unbearable. And by then, the body's already been struggling for a long time. Let's pause for a quick reality check because the numbers on delayed care are sobering. Research published in the BMJ found that just a 4-week delay in cancer treatment can increase the risk of death by up to 13%. That's 1 month. The American Cancer Society reports that when people wait, they're more likely to be diagnosed at an advanced stage, and advanced cancers are harder, more expensive, and often less successful to treat. It's not just cancer. A health affairs study showed that people without regular checkups are twice as likely to end up in the ER for conditions that could have been managed early, like high blood pressure or diabetes. And here's another layer. When care is delayed, it doesn't only affect survival, it affects quality of life. Patients who wait longer often deal with more complications, longer recoveries, and greater disability. So the bottom line is clear. When it comes to health, waiting has a cost, sometimes a very steep one. I want to talk about 3 stories that really challenge the idea that access alone keeps people safe. Because when we think about delayed care, we often assume it's about not having insurance or not being able to afford a doctor or not knowing where to go. But these next stories remind us that even when you have money, influence, and elite medical access, care can still be delayed, dismissed, or ignored. Let's start with Serena Williams. After giving birth to her daughter via emergency C-section, Serena Williams noticed something was wrong. She felt short of breath. She had a history of blood clots. She knew her body. So she did exactly what we tell people to do. She spoke up. She told the medical team she thought she was having a pulmonary embolism. She asked for a CT scan. She asked for blood thinners. And instead of being heard, she was dismissed. A nurse suggested she was confused because of pain medication. It wasn't until Serena insisted, demanded that a doctor be called, that they ran the test. And when they did, they found multiple life threatening blood clots in her lungs. Serena has said plainly, if she hadn't pushed back, she might not be here today. That's not delayed care because of ignorance. That's delayed care because of dismissal. When you hear Serena's story, what hits you the hardest? The medical emergency itself, or the fact that she had to fight to be taken seriously? It's not just that she had a life threatening emergency, it's that she knew what was happening and still had to convince someone to listen. That changes how people show up to care the next time, because once you realize your voice might not matter, like even in an emergency, hesitation starts to feel like self protection. And then there's Brett Favre. He's talked openly about experiencing hundreds of concussions during his NFL career. At the time, they weren't called traumatic brain injuries. They were getting your bell rung. They were part of the game. So he played through them. Most players did. Years later, Brett Favre announced he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, or a condition increasingly linked to repeated head trauma. Looking back, he said plainly, those concussions were never treated seriously, and he believes they played a role in where he is today. That's delayed care rooted in culture, a culture that rewarded toughness, a culture that minimized invisible injuries, a culture that taught athletes, especially men, to keep going at all costs. How much do you think sports culture and honestly, masculinity in general teaches men to ignore warning signs until the damage is already done? That's such an important point because in that culture, ignoring pain isn't seen as risky. It's seen as respectable. You're praised for pushing through, you're rewarded for silence. And by the time someone finally says, hey, something's wrong, the damage is already, and that mindset doesn't stay on the field. It follows men into real life, into doctors' offices, and into years of delayed care. Let's take a quick break to hear from today's sponsor. We've talked about why people delay care: fear, masculinity, mistrust, culture. Now I want to talk about what actually happens when that delay catches up to the body. Because delayed care always has a cost, and that cost shows up physically, emotionally, financially, and sometimes permanently. When symptoms are ignored or dismissed, conditions don't stay the same. They progress. Cancer moves from early stage to advanced stage. High blood pressure quietly damages the heart, kidneys, and brain. Autoimmune diseases continue attacking the body. Brain injuries compound. By the time someone finally seeks care, the question isn't what's going on, it's how much damage has already been done. When you think about everything we've discussed, the normalization, the mistrust, what do you see as the biggest physical cost of waiting too long? For me, the biggest physical cost is that the body loses the chance to heal in a simpler way. When you wait too long, you're not just dealing with the original issue anymore. You're dealing with everything that issue has touched along the way: organs, joints, nerves, energy, stamina. Things that might have been manageable early on become chronic or permanent. What really hits me is how many of these conditions don't have loud warning signs. High blood pressure, early cancer, autoimmune disease, they don't always stop you in your tracks. So people keep going and the body keeps compensating until it can't anymore. And by the time you finally get help, you're not asking, how do I fix this? You're asking, how do I live with this? That's the cost. Waiting takes options off the table. And for athletes, the consequences can be career ending. Chris Bosh's blood clots didn't just affect his health, they ended his time in the NBA. Brett Favre's untreated concussions didn't just cause pain, they reshaped his future. Venus Williams lost years of peak performance before she got answers. Delayed care doesn't just take years off your life, sometimes it takes the life you plan to live. Let's pause for a quick reality check because the research on delayed care is clear. A large study published in the BMJ found that just a 4-week delay in cancer treatment can increase the risk of death by 6 to 13%, depending on the cancer type. The American Cancer Society reports that people who delay screening and treatment are more likely to be diagnosed at advanced stages when treatment is harder and outcomes are worse. And it's not just cancer. A health affairs study showed that people who skip regular care are twice as likely to end up in the emergency room for conditions that could have been managed early, like high blood pressure or diabetes. So waiting doesn't make problems smaller. It makes them louder, harder, and more dangerous. And the consequences aren't just physical. Delayed care creates anxiety, regret, fear, a constant low level stress of knowing something might be wrong but not wanting to face it. People carry guilt, asking themselves, what if I had gone sooner? And that emotional weight can last long after treatment begins. How much do you think delayed care affects people mentally, not just when they get the diagnosis, but in the years that follow? There's also a financial cost. Early care is almost always cheaper than late care. Preventive visits cost far less than hospitalizations. Managing a condition early is far less expensive than treating complications. Delayed care often leads to longer hospital stays, more invasive treatments, lost work, long term disability. So the idea that avoiding care saves money, it usually does the opposite. And what's important to say here is this: people don't delay care because they don't value their lives. They delay because they're navigating fear, mistrust, culture, finances, and survival. But the body doesn't negotiate, it keeps moving forward, whether we're ready or not. So the real question becomes, how do we break this cycle? How do we catch symptoms earlier? How do we rebuild trust? How do we give people tools to understand their bodies before things reach a crisis? That's where solutions come in, including how traditional medicine and functional medicine can work together to help people take action sooner, not later. Today, we've learned a powerful truth. Ignoring symptoms doesn't make them go away, it often makes them worse. We've heard stories from athletes who lost years of their careers, and we've heard personal experiences that remind us this happens in every community, every day. If I could leave our listeners with one thing, it's this: don't wait. Don't let fear, pride, or mistrust keep you from getting checked out. Your health is too important, and the people who love you are counting on you to take care of it. Early action saves lives. Advocacy saves lives. So here's my challenge to you. If there's something you've been putting off, a checkup, a test, a conversation with your doctor, make the call. Do it this week. And if today's conversation spoke to you, share this episode with someone you care about. You never know whose life you might change just by encouraging them to listen. Subscribe to What the Health Confessions of a Black Nurse, wherever you listen to podcasts, and visit healthcarenavigator.co for more resources on coaching, advocacy, and taking charge of your health. Until next time, remember, your health can't wait.